Hello. My name is Stuart Oxenhorn. I am the arts editor at the Aspen Times here in Aspen. I want to tell you, turn off your cell phones, and we actually do mean it. Turn off your cell phones. And also want to remind you that the two authors here are going to be available for signing in the lobby afterwards, right after this event. So if you want to talk to them, if you want to get your book signed, go to the lobby afterwards, and they'll be there, and they can talk to you. Sign your books, right? I go over to the Aspen Writers Foundation's office in the Red Brick Building very often, partly because the women there are so attractive, and even more so because Lisa's always got chocolate on her desk, and that's a big draw for me. I think the chocolate's there because they want me to come in. And very often the topic of conversation is about Colum McCann and the always how he's got some difficulty with whatever writing project he's got going on. And my response to that is always, well, yeah, of course he's got difficulty writing because what he's trying to do, which is write a novel, is an incredibly difficult thing to do. And he makes it harder on himself sometimes by putting in multiple perspectives into his novels, which is, just raises the degree of difficulty, I would think, extraordinarily. And it's something he did to amazing effect in Let the Great World Spin. And Assaf Gavron, who is sitting next to him, has done a similar thing in his book, Almost Dead. Those of you from the UK might know the book as Croc Attack, because it's got a different title there. But he tells the story from two completely different, pretty much opposite perspectives. And to me, this strikes me like, saying, okay, I'm going to stop Dirk Nowitzki from scoring, except I'm going to do it with my shoelaces tied together so that, I got to do it like this, Makes it very difficult, I think. So, yeah. See, for me, there's no temptation to tie my shoes together. Makes walking easier. So we're going to have a conversation about writing a novel when you really try to make this especially difficult by writing from multiple perspectives. Okay.
Thank you, Stuart. Thank you. Okay, so here we are. Hello, everybody.
Hello.
So you had a longer flight than me.
Yeah, much longer. How long was yours?
I came from Dublin, so it was Dublin to New York to Denver to Aspen. And you came from Tel Aviv.
Did you stop in New York at home? Or
no, just straight through.
On.
Yeah.
Tel Aviv, Newark, Denver, Aspen.
Except I told him I swam the Irish portion. So we're here to talk about diversity of voices and
yeah. Let me ask the first question.
Okay.
Well, first of all, you have I flew more hours, but you have more characters, more perspective. I thought it was 9, but you told me yesterday it's more.
13, I think.
13.
Yeah.
I have only 2, but there is one similar thing that you can possibly, as a reader, say that one or in your case maybe 2 of the characters are in a way closer to you. There is an Irish guy coming to New York,
right,
and there is very different characters or very far from your life. For example, for example, a black hooker.
Yes. That's pretty far from my life, although,
okay.
Yeah.
So my question is, how do you, is it easier to write the Irish guy, and how do you learn about those characters who are further from your life, or what do you do there?
Well, I always think that the great triumph of literature is to become alive in a time or geography or body that is not your own. When I think about it, I think very much towards, I was telling my students about this this morning, I think very much towards my great-grandfather, who walked the streets of Dublin on June the 16th, 1904, which, as you all know, is the day that Ulysses is set. It was Bloomsday, 3 days ago now. And the thing is, I never met my great-grandfather. And I only met my grandfather, who also was alive at that time. I only met him once. But I can meet Leopold Bloom anytime I want when I open up that book. And Leopold Bloom is more real to me than even my great-grandfather, who I know is my own flesh and blood, who I know is sort of thumping through me. But I haven't heard all that many stories about him or anything like that. But Leopold Bloom makes my great-grandfather more real to me than if the book didn't exist. And I think that's part of the beauty of what's going on. And see, the thing is, you can have as many lives as you want if you're a reader. Those who don't read, it seems to me that they must live these lives of sort of narrowness and that Hardy thing, is it Hardy who talked about lives of quiet desperation? Mm-hmm. And it seems to me that that's the great thing that we can do in reading books. And then you get a chance to do it by going right to the heart of the political current in your country, right? And I've been reading this book today, and it's absolutely fantastic what you do. It's also a compulsively wonderful page turner. So just so everybody knows, but it's interesting to me, and I know I didn't answer your question. Is it more difficult?
He's flattering me.
No.
To get out of.
Because I want to ask you the same thing. Is it more difficult to write, close to the bone, or to invent that character? For me, in terms of Let the Great World Spin, it was very easy to write that character, the Irish character who sort of came over to New York in the 70s, because it was actually very close to me, and it gave me breath, and I was able to do it. Other Irish characters are not so easy for me, and I don't know if it depends on the geography of where they come from, and I don't even know if it depends on your own inner geography. I think it depends on the character herself or himself. If I wanted to, I could probably call up more easily the language of that 38-year-old hooker in the Bronx than I could the language of the Irish guy who's Corrigan. Kieran Corrigan is his name in the book. So I'm not so sure. I mean, and that's why I'd like to ask you the same sort of question. Is it easier to write from an Israeli point of view, or say a Palestinian point of view, as you've done in the book?
It is easier, but it is also in a way restricting. I mean, when you write about a different life than yours, in a way you are more free because you're inventing more. But if it's a realistic novel, like both these novels are, and in Israel, it's about a very sensitive issue also, about the current political situation. So it's very important for me to stay faithful as much as possible to the reality. And when I don't live the Palestinian reality, then obviously it becomes much harder to write this character who lives in this reality than to write the Israeli character. So for me, it involved a lot of research. Some of it was, you can say, unconscious research I did through life by living next to Palestinians and also as a soldier in the Israeli army during the first Intifada, where I, for the first time, really saw the lives of Palestinians.
Where were you?
In Gaza.
In Gaza?
Yeah. In refugee camps and in
Jabalia, or
Jabalia.
You were in Jabalia?
You've been there?
Yeah. And I've been there because a friend has been there, and in the sense that he writes about it and talks about it an awful lot,
Okay.
pictures and again, it's like transporting yourself through a book.
Oh. Who's that?
He's an American writer, Jeff Tallarigo. He's working on a book about Gaza right now.
Ah. It's funny. I mean, Gaza is very small, but I was actually a long time in Jabalia itself, which is a refugee camp. So it's.
And you were a soldier there. How long were you there for?
Altogether, I think about 4 months, maybe 6 months. The first Intifada started at the end of '88, and I was then a year and a half in the army. So my unit is in the south, so we were sent to Gaza for a few months.
And did you experience combat? Did you have stones thrown, or?
Yeah, I mean the first stones, the first Intifada was very different to the second one. It was less violent. There was no hot weapons, no shooting, no bombs. It was a protest mainly with stones, and the army also retaliated much lighter than it did later with gas, tear gas and stuff like that. And the number of casualties was much smaller. But yeah, it was really ridiculous. We used to go into the camp, and they used to throw stones, and then we used to shoot tear gas, and we would go out of the camp, and they would be quiet. So.
Did you hate it?
Yeah. I mean, I hated the whole 3 years of the army. I don't know if I hated this more. I think only later I realized that I was part of a mechanism which is very wrong. As a kid, I didn't think much about it. On the contrary, it was maybe more interesting than the routine, you know.
Really? You were what, 17, 18?
I was 19.
19.
Yeah. But
were you allowed to become a conscientious objector if you wanted to be?
We had one soldier who was, and they gave him a hard time, but he eventually they couldn't force him to serve, so he was moved to a different unit. But we're not talking about.
No, but it's interesting because it must speak into it speaks into the book. Then I mean, because obviously you're looking at those streets and you're trying to imagine what the lives of those people are, because you're looking at your own life, and these kids are throwing stones at you, and maybe you're throwing stones back or like firing tear gas in, or wanting to be there or not wanting to be there, and saying, why the fuck am I doing this, and why is my country doing this, and why are these people throwing stones at me? Then it feeds into the work, right?
I think it did. I mean, I always say that this was the first part of the research into Fahmy, the Palestinian character, was being there at that time. Although it was Gaza and this is the West Bank, although it was the first Intifada and this is the second Intifada, and although he's obviously a character that I never met personally.
But all those characters that we never meet are sometimes more real than the ones, down the street that are hidden away in the shadows. That's what I'm saying, that the value of literature is being enabled to go into that body and sort of understand what it's like to have. I mean, he's a suicide bomber. He's a frustrated suicide bomber, right? And he's in bed and.
He's it's a member of a terrorist team.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
But I actually, you said something before about that it would be easier for you to recall the language of the hooker than the Irish guy, and this made me think about technique. I mean, when you do write the different characters, do you invent this certain language? Do you words that repeat, or thoughts that repeat, or what do you have any tips?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that I could go back into virtually every character that I've ever had had time with, and then reinvent read it again, and then have the voice in me. In other words, once the voice is there one time, I think it's there always. And for me, it's all about the language, about the words that they choose, the way they choose to sling the words at the page, the way they choose to, put their dialogue marks, for instance, the way they choose to curse, the accent that they put on things. I think I could find it. Like, I wrote a book called Zoli, which is 2 books ago, but I'm pretty sure that if I was given a couple of days and wanted to go back into her head and had a quick look at like what she was saying before, that I could find her again. In fact, the funny thing, I don't know if you feel this way, I sometimes feel about my characters that I could go to the place where they were, and they should be there. I could turn the corner. So if I went to the Bronx, I feel that I should be able to meet Tilly and maybe pay her $20 for, I don't know. No, or I could go to northern Italy where Zoli ends up and walk up this little road and knock on this fictional hut, which obviously doesn't exist, and just be there with her. It's an odd sensation to think that your characters actually do live in the world. If you get a character wrong, then I don't think you'd be able to do that. If you're being dishonest with a character, then I don't think they would actually exist in the long run.
Do you ever admit that you get a character wrong?
Fuck yeah! Oh, excuse me. Oh no, all the time. I mean, I throw things away all the time, and then I suppose sometimes you use characters. You know, I wrote a book called Dancer, which is a fictionalization of the life of Rudolf Nureyev, and that has like dozens and dozens of different voices. And some of them were just a conduit to get away with it. Like there's a rent boy in it, for instance, that is just, you know, is a page and a half long. And that wasn't really entirely true. But it wasn't such a big character or anything like that. But other characters there are still quite real for me.
So, but when you were working, you're saying that there were characters that did not feel right?
Yeah, you know the way when you're writing a book, you just got to get through at certain times.
Yeah.
And some of it's smoke and mirrors, and some of it's like, you know, pushing the book along, and you got to do something, you know, with them, because you do want to get towards the end.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, again, I feel like I'm talking about what I was talking to my students about this morning, but to me, every book is a failure. It never quite gets to what it really dreamt it should be. But if you get an accent on the page, and then I think that's always a fun thing, and the accent sort of returns to you. I mean, could you turn around now and bring up the voices again?
Yeah, I guess so. And what you said about places is also resonated in me because, for example, Fahmy, both of them, they meet in this industrial zone in a horrible town, about 20 kilometers from Tel Aviv, and obviously it's not a place I go there a lot, but every time I do get to that area, they come out.
Croc is there and Fahmy's
Yeah,
there.
yeah, they're there in the little falafel shop where they went to eat.
Well, I'm interested in also in the notion that, like, you know, even when it's not yourself, is it somehow autobiographical anyway?
I think it is. I mean, I don't know how you would resolve the black hooker with that, but
yeah.
But for me, definitely, definitely. There are Fahmy and Croc, the two characters in my book. They are, in a way, they're different, but there's also a lot of common to them. And I think that actually maybe in Fahmy there's more of me than in Croc. Although on the outside he works, he lives, he even drove on the same bus that I used to not drove but rode that I used to.
The number 5.
The number 5, yeah. So yeah, I think and at the moment I'm also working on this novel with many characters. I don't know if all of them have these elements, but I think the main ones certainly do. And I'm going through this painful process now of realizing that one of the characters is not right. This is why I asked you if you can tell.
I'm doing the same sort of thing, but I'd like to talk about that. But I want to ask you, like, do you think it's about autobiographical empathy? In other words, it doesn't necessarily have to be autobiographical as to what you did and where you were and what you looked like, but that you had some sort of emotional link to that feeling at that particular time. Like, you know, one of the things that I've had to deal with in my life, I try to do a lot of different voices, like, and you know, my poor mother at home in Ireland has to deal with all sorts of things. One of the first books I wrote was Song Dogs, and my mum is from Derry, and but the mother in the book was from Mexico, and the father had taken semi-lurid photographs of her, you know, well, not pornographic, but semi-erotic photographs of her. And my mum read this, and some friends of hers called her up and says, "Sally, you're not from Mexico, are you?" You know, it's like, and did Sean really take pictures of you in the bath? And she was mortified, of course, but and then she had to deal later with her son, you know, and I'm straight, white, middle class, you know, Dublin, but I spent 40 pages of another book in the gay underworld clubs of New York, you know, and I did a lot of research for all this sort of stuff. But she has to explain this to her friends, and one of her, oh, I shouldn't tell this story. No, I won't tell that. No. All right, okay. You twisted my arm. No, one of my students gave a book to his mother, and she said, "Oh, it's a great book, and there's lots of bad words in it." And she said, "But son, what does rimming mean?" I'm like, "Oh my gosh! I told you I shouldn't have told that story."
My first novel was full of violence and sex. I was trying to be Bret Easton Ellis, an Israeli version of American Psycho, Israeli Psycho. But you know,
what was that book called?
It was called Ice. But you know, and my parents, I didn't let them read it before it was published. And when it was, I don't know, I was young. I think I didn't care that much. But I think they were a bit mortified also.
Right. Well, I wonder now about my kids. I mean, what my kids are going to think of me. You know, they're not allowed to read my books at all.
Yeah, but they will one day.
I told this story last year in Aspen, but my son, Johnny Michael, I went to his school bag at one stage, and it was really heavy, and I pick up the thing, and like, I say to him, "Johnny Michael, what's the story?" And he goes, "Nothing, Dad, nothing." So you know immediately there's something going on. So I opened up the bag, and there was 4 hardback copies of Let the Great World Spin. I was like, "What's the story?" He says, "Oh, I'm sorry. And I said, "There's nothing to be sorry about." I said, "But what do you got all these for?" And he says, "Well, I'm bringing them to school so I can show all the other lads the FUK parts." I said, "You have to learn how to spell." Because you won't find otherwise. No, but it's interesting because...
But like, it's always nice that your kids are proud of you.
Well, the kids are proud. Yeah. But it'll be interesting for them to see. See, to me, it is about that emotion. I mean, to be serious about it for a minute, it is about that emotional empathy, that emotional autobiography, that somehow you've seen something in the world, or you've come upon something in the world that you've wanted to write about, and you really are writing about yourself, but you're using it in a different vein. And so when you're talking about the sadness that the characters encounter, or the beauty that they encounter, or the difficulty that they encounter, some of it is because you want to do that yourself, or you want to go on that sort of journey yourself, and some of it is because you've seen some of it yourself, and you need to write about it. And I think you're right in that it's kind of easier sometimes to write outside of your immediate self.
Yeah. And what about if it's a really horrible character?
Yeah, well, that's the thing. I mean, you have to deal with that yourself. I think you have to look fairly closely into all the dark parts of yourself and realize, you know, like this character, Kieran Corrigan in Let the Great World Spin, the brother. His brother, the monk, is a wonderful, like genuine. He's full of empathy and love for the world and dignity and grace. But he himself is not. I mean, he has little moments of racism. He has, you know, and he gets away with things, and he's sort of underhanded and you know. And this is, I suppose, one confronting one's own self.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. It's a kind of a psychological, you know, treatment, a therapy session.
Would you ever go? Would you ever go to a therapist?
Well, I did for a while.
Sorry, I did not mean to.
It's interesting. No, it's no problem. It's yeah. I mean, you do have to deal with parts of yourself, some of them not pleasant. And I totally agree with you that they can show up in characters in your books who are unpleasant, who are maybe even violent and horrible in a million different ways.
But why do you think we need like psychologists and psychiatrists when we have fiction?
Well, maybe that's the reason I stopped going to. You know, everyone could use different set of devices or people or advisors or psychologists to help him at different points in his life.
But isn't it just a contemporary form of storytelling? It's just a way to legitimize I mean, okay, somebody's out there who's a psychologist, psychiatrist is going to rip me asunder. but is it just a legitimate way to sort of say, you know, come and tell your story?
Yeah, it is. That's basically what it is. It's supposedly the one person, which sounds strange because it's a stranger, at least to begin with, the one person that you can say everything to.
Right, and I realize I'm being unfair because what's brilliant about the profession is it allows access to those people who are not able to invent their own story to go in and understand what they are about.
Yes, even people who can invent, I think, maybe need this outlet where they know that it's the bare truth or the bare honesty of their lives. Wow. I think it's a combination. Another thing I wanted to ask you, you mentioned Nureyev. I don't know, you kindly gave me the book, but is he one of the characters?
Yeah, he's one of the characters.
So what do you do about that, about a person that is known, a famous person, and specifically in Let the World Spin, Let the Great World Spin, Philippe Petit, I wanted to ask you if you watched that documentary before you finished writing the book? Or
no. I was about 2/3 of the way through the book when I heard there was going to be a documentary.
Okay.
And then I finished the book before I went to see the documentary, but I was petrified by the documentary. I mean, literally, I walked over, I live on the east side, I walked over to the west side to Lincoln Center Theatre in New York, and I went to 11:30 showing of Man on Wire, because I didn't want anyone to see me, and I didn't want anyone to see me coming out, because I figured...
Was the book published then?
No.
Okay.
I hadn't even given it to my agents. Nobody. It was just it was nice, and I thought, I might be coming out of this cinema in 2.5 hours, throwing that book away. Wow. And I didn't know what to expect, and I was terrified. I was really terrified. And then when I watched it, I felt okay because it was a beautiful film. I thought it was a really strong film, but it had nothing to do with my book. I think it.
But there are bits. It's not a major character, but there are parts about him.
Oh yeah.
For those who don't understand, Philippe Petit is the guy who walked between the two buildings of the World Trade Center, which is the book Let the Great World Spin revolves around this event. And there was a documentary that came out around the same time, or a little before the book. And he is interviewed there, and there are pictures there about preparing. But I was asking in relation to this discussion, to his character or his voice. After you saw the film, you didn't want to go back and change or add?
No, that was the thing. I didn't want to. There was nothing I discovered in the film that helped the book, and there was nothing that intruded upon it. But I have to. It's very important for me to say that I thought it was a really great piece of work. Yeah. And the most important thing to say is that I didn't have the original idea. Philippe Petit had the original idea. Yeah. That was the amazing thing, and he'd also written a book. And there'd been a children's book, and then there was a brilliant New Yorker cover. There was all this stuff that was there. So, but what really interests me is one of my great heroes of all literature, John Berger. He says, "Never again will a single story be told as if it were the only one." Yeah. And I love that line because I just think it speaks to the fact that we can be kaleidoscopic, and nobody owns history. And the whole thing about Nureyev is who owns history? Who has the right to tell that story? And can it be told through the point of view of like dozens of different voices?
Yeah.
And so you say you're working on something now with lots of different voices.
Yes, it takes place in a settlement, in an illegal settlement in the West Bank, a small outpost, and it's basically the different characters, and they're very different. There's immigrants from America, from Russia, from France. There are veteran Israelis, but from different places, from kibbutzim and from obviously religious backgrounds, but different streams of religion.
We need to hear that story because I don't understand the settlements. I mean, there's a lot I don't understand. I mean, just like people don't understand a lot of things about what went on in Northern Ireland, and you try to hear them. But I would love to be able to understand how those things are allowed to go ahead.
Well, first of all, I have to get over this character, and if I manage to get him right, then it might be published, so you might be able to read. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. But I don't know. Again, I don't know if this novel explains the settlements or why they are allowed to.
But we'll be in a settlement at least. I mean, I haven't been allowed to be in a settlement. I mean, I read some good stuff in the New York Times. I read some good stuff in Mother Jones. I confess to reading Mother Jones, and being a fairly fairly lefty on this whole situation.
Yeah.
But I want to hear about those right-wing American people and Russians who are living in the settlements there. Why they're there and what they think they can achieve.
I think, if to explain it shortly, it's certainly the only place in Israel now where there's real passion, real ideological passion, and real feel that they are doing something.
Right.
Now, you and me think that they are doing, they're destroying a lot, and they're harming any chance for many people to live peacefully. But for them, if you're asking the motivation, it's the only place. Israel is a very young country, and it's only 63 years old. And in its early days and before it was founded, there was a lot of passion, of ideology, of belief, of building, of people realizing their dream, and so on, and big ideas, and actually working and building them. And Israel became, it became what it became, which we won't go into, but it's a modern country. It exists. People live comfortably. They not everyone, but they could. In some ways, I know that not in all ways, but in some ways, like many other countries. But
Well, maybe like America.
maybe
I mean this whole go west, young man sort of frontier thing, like that we can have it, and then realize then there's no frontier anymore, and then you got to go inwards, and then you have to look at yourself,
Exactly.
and then you become something else.
And this is the answer for what the settlers are looking for.
Right, because they're trying to gain territory, because they're trying to push it outward.
They're looking for the frontier, for the ideology, for meaning,
Right.
and belief, and it's a place. For that reason, I find it very fascinating to go in there, and I've been visiting a lot, and I've been traveling a lot, and to see how it's done, and specifically the smaller places which are more extreme, and also are more. There's more tension there with the army, with the Palestinians, with the politicians.
I don't want to go off topic, but I desperately want to ask you about the peace process, because I know what happened in Ireland, and I know what it took for people to come about and to institute a peace process. I know what Mitchell was talking about when he's talking about how frustrating it is to be there. Mitchell was in Ireland. For those of you, it's like George Mitchell was one of the great architects of peace in Northern Ireland. But really, the true architects were on the ground, and they were like anonymous in the small, and then of course there were the Irish politicians doing it and English politicians. Yeah. But it seemed to me that it was all community based in the long run. And like people never would have said in the 1970s when we were blowing each other asunder in Northern Ireland and in Manchester, Birmingham, Dublin even. People never would have said that we could have gotten to the place where there would be peace. And it's still a tentative peace. It's still on tenterhooks in certain ways. But, do you ever think that do you ever, what sort of dream is there of peace at home?
Well, at the moment, it looks quite bleak. I mean, as you say, Mitchell, who had a big role in Ireland, he more or less gave up. And Tony Blair, who had the role in Ireland, he came and spent some months as a special whatever
envoy.
From England or from Europe.
Mike Carter was there. Clinton's been there. All the Oslo guys have been there.
And they all more or less gave up. And at the moment, you have on both sides. In terms of the leadership, you have quite extreme people who are not truthfully wanting to go ahead and to give it a chance. And as a result of that, the people also, the actual people, there's very little faith, very little trust. And this is what we need. We need trust.
Well, this is what we need. But see, can I say that I was talking with a friend about this just a couple of nights ago, and just the small people on the ground who somehow have to do it. I know, with the story swap. What they eventually want to do with Story Swap here is get like a group of kids from Colorado, a group of kids from New Orleans, a group of kids from Jabalia, and a group of kids from, say, Jerusalem. And imagine getting all of them together. And is it possible that we can do it even like on the ground with things like Story Swap? Yeah, I mean, they used to do it with Catholic and Protestant kids in Northern Ireland. They bring them to Boston or whatever and say, "Geez, you're not blue. You don't have you don't have devil horns or anything like that." It's like they get to understand each other away from the all the terror.
There are all kinds of programs. There's Story Swap that I heard of here. It sounds great, and they're going to work in Israel and Arab and Israel and Jewish Israel next year. And there are other incredible programs of Palestinian kids coming to Israel, and vice versa. But it's all really tiny drops that are not yet collecting into a significant.
Do you believe that? I think. Do you believe in the power of literature to be able to negotiate that? I know, for example, I'm saying it because I know that Heaney helped us. Seamus Heaney helped us get the peace process in Northern Ireland. Absolutely, and Michael Longley and Paul Muldoon and Ivan Boll and the poets and some of the fiction writers as well. They were negotiating these ideas of what's happened to the collective consciousness, what's happened to the landscape. At least if you get to tell, the story won't ever solve the politics, but it becomes a stay against some of the despair. If we weren't telling our stories, I think we'd completely collapse over into complete anarchy and despair.
But who did they affect? Did they affect the readers or?
They affected the readers, they affected the people on the ground, they affected the ones who were giving money towards some of these smaller organisations like Cooperation North, who are doing bicycle rides between Dublin and Belfast. Little things that happen on the ground, little organisations, arts organisations that do things. And then, maybe the kids say to their grandfathers, what's going on? And the grandfathers have no answer to why people are blowing each other asunder.
Well, in that sense, I guess writers, and most of the writers are pro-peace and left-wing, and the big writers, Amos Oz and David Grossman and Yoshua and so on. But, we're still a minority, and we still you know, you see the mainstream media, you see the, you know, people don't read that much. They don't hear. Yeah, they affect they convince the convinced. They convince the convinced.
Well, then isn't it useless, though? Is it not useless then to tell the story? Is it like the little boy with the finger in the dam, and that's about it?
I don't know. I'm usually an optimistic person, but at this point in time, it's really hard for me to say anything optimistic.
It would have been really
hard. Of course, I believe in literature. You know, this is what I do, and I believe it should and could have an effect which is more than entertainment. Although entertainment is a good enough reason to do it, but it does affect. But at the same time, at this point in time, it's hard for me to see where we're gonna find a way through this. But who knows? Yeah,
it would be. I mean, it would be. It would be stunning to see it. But you know,
maybe we had, you know, when Obama was elected, we kind of had the hopes raised. Then they kind of fell down. But he seems to be, I don't know, maybe if anything at this point in time, if anything could push something forward, then maybe he could.
Yeah. Well, you know, you have to know, like, that the Irish peace process was so, like these guys were at completely, like, Ian Paisley would walk into a room if Jerry Adams had been in the room 5 minutes before, and he would spray air freshener into the room. And, like, they would not talk to each other. They would just, there was no way that they would sit down. And it took someone like Mitchell to go along, and Mitchell was actually talking about opera to them. Like, he didn't want to talk about, like, various literature or football teams, because your football team is tied into politics, and maybe some of your literature. And so he started talking about opera, and they're like, opera? What the fuck is that? You know, or whatever they said, I don't know. But somehow the story is that he sort of got them, you know, talking and coming into the same room together. And then you realize, well, you're not the, you know, the three-headed dragon, or you realize, you know, I don't want my in particular, it seemed to me they were talking about grandchildren. Yeah. But you know, the Irish thing has gone on a long time. If you take it for 700 years, you know, and then we were talking about it going from the late 60s as well. Yeah. The Israeli.
Well, we're talking about 100 and maybe 100, between 100 and 150 years. So if it's going to take 700 years. No. But if it will be solved at the end of 700 years, I'll take it.
Yeah. Well, I would agree with that. Are there any Palestinian voices that you really like right now?
Yes, there's what is called Israeli Arabs or Israeli Palestinians. There is a good friend of mine, Syed Kashua. When you mentioned the horns, he has this scar here, and he always says that he's an Arab. It's a scar from his horn. He's a wonderful writer, and his next book in English, it's out already in Hebrew. It's called Second Person, which when it's out, you should look out for. And unfortunately, in Palestine itself, I mean, there has been tradition of great poets and so on, but I still haven't read. I mean, I would love Fahmy, the Palestinian character in my book, to be written actually by a Palestinian, but I haven't read yet a lot of fiction written under occupation or from the last like decades. But I'm sure we will read in the future. I mean,
God, I hope so.
We must.
But also we've got to. There's got to be more access given to writers to be able to go there. I mean, it's really hard to get in to get there. John Berger was trying to get there recently, and he had to do all sorts of like machinations and changing the cars and all this sort of crazy stuff in order to go in and just talk to a group of Palestinian kids in the camps.
I know.
I mean, that's one of the things. We got to be allowed access so we can find out.
I know they have some festivals from time to time and some good writers visiting, but not enough. You're right.
Yeah. And that's why I think, see, this book that you're working sort of excites me, like, because then we can go there in a certain way. Getting back to,
Yeah.
The possibility of using literature in different characters. So is it told from, like, are there Russian Jews and American Jews?
It's different. It's a different makeup of the settlement itself, which are, as I said, the immigrants from different countries and Israelis from different backgrounds, different streams of religion, of Jewishness, and obviously the relations with the neighbors, with Palestinians, with the army, with politicians, with American donors, and so on. So, and I'm trying to write it funny, but my first readers...
Yeah, this book, by the way, your book is really funny. I have to say that. It's really profound and it sort of gathers up. It's got a fantastic pace, but it's also just very funny, which is a nice way to approach what's going on.
Well, exactly. It's the best way for me to approach even the most tragic situation. But I have to work on that in the Settlers book, because the reactions I got are that it's not that funny. Yeah. But maybe, I think we're running over what we planned. So
we were going to talk about football and all that stuff, but we didn't even get a chance to talk about football. Can I just say, in relation to voices, that one of my own favourite voices is Nathan Englander, and that book, For the Relief of Unbearable Urges. I know we were talking about it, but if you want to know, like, see some of the most gorgeous short stories that have been written, I think Nathan Englander wrote the 27th Man and the Tumblers in that book, For the Relief of Unbearable Urges. He's a new set of stories coming out next year. But he's a voice, again, from New York, but originally from a fundamentalist background, and then lived in
Jewish fundamentalists.
Jewish fundamentalists.
Yeah. He grew up in an ultra-religious family in New York. Orthodox, yeah.
And then went over there and sort of tried to make sense of it for himself.
Yeah.
So
I also recommend him. So should we take questions from?
Yeah, absolutely.
If you have any.
Is anyone brave enough to take it? We have a microphone roaming around the room somewhere.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Are the different characters being written in first person as ways of being able to tell the story from their different points of view? I'm sorry.
What are we talking about? In my novel Almost Dead, yes, it's two characters in first person. In your book, most of them, but not all of them.
But sometimes it's close third person, sometimes it's second person, sometimes it's third person removed. I'm using a variety of different mirrors and angles to look at. Sometimes it's all three of them at once. There's a character in it, Claire, who lives on the Upper East Side, and you're both... it's that old thing that we learned from Joyce all those years ago, like, be in the head, but also be in the body and the space and the geography. So using sometimes 3 or 4 different points of view to get across one point of view, and that's just the technical thing. But the real question is, you have to ask yourself who's telling the story and why they're telling the story.
Yeah, I think so.
David Rosenberg was on this book tour. We had lunch with him in Philadelphia. And he said when Israeli and writers are at a conference with Arab writers in Europe, usually it's not uncommon that the Israeli and the Palestinian writers pair together because they have a similar sense of humor, and they also can communicate with them very easily.
Yeah, I agree with that. I lived in Berlin last year, and I was going somewhere, and when I came off the train, and there was a fruit stand, and I wanted to buy fruit on the way back when I was coming back, so I wanted to ask the guy when he's going to close the shop, the stand, and then I heard him speak Arabic, so I tried with my really poor Arabic to ask him. And then he asked, we tried, he turned out he was from Gaza, and we almost hugged each other. I mean, and we started talking, and it was so much fun. And especially I think in Germany, not because of the Holocaust stuff, I'm not talking about that, but just a foreign country, that you live in a foreign country and you feel a foreigner, and suddenly I felt someone that was not a foreigner. And it's true also for literary events. I felt the same things also. Yeah.
I think there's a question in the middle.
Okay.
Right here?
The woman
In the
here?
middle, right here? Yeah.
Yes.
Hi. I wasn't quite clear, Assaf, if your book is the one you're writing about now, is about the settlements, or it was almost dead about the settlements?
Yes, sorry. Yeah, the one I'm working on now.
Okay.
It will be a while before it's
Oh,
published.
I see. And Colum, is your book about Frederick Douglass going to be finished soon, or?
I wish. Yeah, I've been working on a book which I actually started here last year about Frederick Douglass and his visit to Ireland, and I ran into some considerable problems. Frederick has given me a hard time, and I have another book that I'm working on actually, which has absolutely everything to do with voices. Maybe in a couple of years I'll have 2 finished novels. I started like doing them in tandem, and they're so ridiculously different from one another. But one is Douglas in Ireland, and he's frozen. He's in the fridge right now. He's going to go in the freezer fairly soon. And the other one is a very contemporary, up-to-date New York novel about surveillance, believe it or not, called 13 Ways of Looking, which is based on the poem 13 Ways of Looking at a Blackbird by Wallace Stevens. It's really an investigation of poetry and an investigation of like how our lives are sort of watched and under-watched at the same time.
So the catalyst for your books are usually something that's not preachy, but it's insignificant, like the Romany Gypsies or Frederick or something like that. Do you always sort of seek out something that is significant to start from?
Well, I don't know. Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, because it might be pretentious to seek out something significant, but then in the end, you know, if you write what you want to know about, and then I think you got to tackle some of the bigger issues of the day. But you're right. It's it's art and it's entertainment. But when you're 80 years old, you probably want to look back and say, well, maybe I did something, or at least I brought up a relatively significant question. I don't believe that personally, okay, I don't believe that I can answer any questions. But I do what the best sort of Irish situation. When you're Irish and you get asked a question, you always respond with another question. It's like that's what you do. Yeah. It's like because we just can't talk.
Your accent is even constructed in a way that it sounds like a question.
That's right.
But I want to ask something else.
Do you think we're the lost tribe, by the way?
I hope you are. I like you. But I wanted to ask. When you tell what your books are going to be about, future books, don't you think it's very risky?
It's really risky.
But you still tell. Me too. I gave a presentation about the research of the settlements almost 2 years ago, and it's still a long way away. So I don't know.
I know it's very, very risky, but as long as you don't go into too many details about like exactly what's going on, because you got to keep some of it secret, because you got to go home to it. And sort of fall in love with it and keep it your own. I think that's important. You can talk about the general idea of it, but I think talking about the
maybe it's even a good thing that you kind of make a contract, and then you cannot. Well, you can, but maybe you feel more obligated to fulfill it.
Yeah, it's hard to throw away work though. That's the thing.
This woman, I don't know if. Who should decide?
You should decide.
Okay, this woman.
It's on?
Yeah.
Yes, okay. I was interested, Colum said that your book is humorous, because it doesn't seem terribly humorous to me, so I've been sitting here trying to think of the humor, and there are things that really make me stop, and I've been wondering how much of it is your imagination and how much of it is based in what's going on. For example, the people betting on where the next terrorist attack was going to be and how many people would be killed. that really made a huge impact on me because I hadn't heard that takes place. And there was a little humor in it in a way, in a very sad way, sort of. And can you explain where that idea comes from?
Well, I heard that such thing really took place at the time. There were bombs going off every day, so there were bets, not official, but some people betting on where the next attack will be and how many casualties will be. You know, I think this is what I what I hate about the reality of this conflict. As a person who lives there, I love as a writer. It's full of unbelievable and absurd and very extreme situations. And as a writer, for me, it's wonderful material to play with. But most of it is you know, even if it's not real, then something even more bizarre could be real.
Don't you think that humor is inevitably tragic as well? I mean, really good humor is always like, you know, somebody fell off the cliff and did this, you know, or jumped, you know.
Yeah, and it's also specifically Jewish humor. Not that I, you know.
Is there a specific Jewish humor? Yeah.
Well, you know, the American from Marx Brothers, Woody Allen, Seinfeld, blah blah blah, and so on. It is considered, at least in Israel, as Jewish humor. Yeah, there is something of going into the tragic or sad situations.
It's like the Irish, you know, like our songs, you know, the sweetest songs tell of the saddest thought, you know. All the songs are about war and, you know, and we all get up and sing, you know, and Johnny went arching down the road, hurrah, hurrah, you know. It's like
Yeah.
crazy, yeah. Do we have?
I want to ask you about taking you back to your comments about empathy and whether you think, for each of you, whether that's something that you thought made you into a fiction writer, your empathy, or whether you develop empathy through your writing.
Good question.
Yeah. Possibly. I don't know what made me a writer, but I know that for me it's something that is essential. I can write about a suicide bomber, a Palestinian terrorist, and I'm always asked how I could, but for me it was, you know, it was almost natural. Not that I ever thought of becoming a suicide bomber, but I can see where it's coming from, and I want to know where it's coming from. And at the same way with crazy right-wing settlers that I'm working on now. So it doesn't matter who it is, but trying to empathize and understand where it's coming from, especially if it's a society that is very stereotyped, that everyone has an opinion, everyone knows about the settlers is a good example. To go and to try and break it a bit, and to because there are people there. There are people with the terrorists. Israelis tried really hard during this period to say they're not people, they're animals, but they're not animals, they're people. So for me to get into this mind was essential.
Yeah, but I love your point about, like, do you develop more empathy as you go along as a writer? Do you necessarily have to become more empathetic? I think the best writers possibly do, and they become more deeply empathetic as they go along, and they got to be careful, and I think you have to, you know, develop humility and sort of get rid of yourself as much as you possibly can. But I don't know where. I mean, do you start off with empathy, or do you start off with anger? I mean, I don't think that there's an awful lot of really good books written out of anger or hatred. It just doesn't seem to work. of course, Mein Kampf was written out of hatred, and books like that. But that's not a great book. It did affect the world, and Mao's Little Red Book was written out of a sort of hatred as well. But when we're talking about what we're talking about on stage here tonight, I think most really great books were written out of I think a sort of benevolent, a decency and benevolence in the beginning, to want to understand what the other is like. I mean, it seems to me that the great function of life is to understand the other, because like you live with yourself 24 hours a day. It's nice to be someone else, at least a few hours of the day.
Yeah, and this I think it's been enhanced in the 20th century, because before then there wasn't much interaction with the other, but the 20th century really people started moving,
Right.
started shifting and immigrating.
Right.
And I think since then the other is the most important thing.
Yeah, Ondaatje talks about the international Mongols, Ondaatje and Rushdie and people like that doing like incredible work. But I think we should go out and have a glass of wine with everyone and develop empathy over a glass of wine or something like that. Is that right? Or do you want another question?
We do have... okay, final one has to go to Eleanor. Go ahead.
Hello. This is a technical question, and mainly because I went on and on in class this morning, intermediate fiction, about point of view switches, don't do it. So could you just say something about the do's and the don'ts technically, so I don't have to backtrack tomorrow in class? That, because especially when you talked about 3 or 4 different views at the same time, that there must be rules that you follow?
Well, I think you're right, and I will say to your students that you're entirely right. That don't switch your point of view in the middle of the sentences and stuff like that, unless that's what you're absolutely trying to do, unless you're trying to break the rule and draw attention to it. But I was talking about not a point of view, I was talking about a point of the way of saying something. So in other words, she walked into the kitchen, must make tea. Joshua never liked his tea. She moves down through the corridor, and I should have told him something. That sort of thing. And it's all the same point of view, but it's just told in a sort of shifting style.
I don't know. When I wrote the 2 characters, the way it's in the book, it's chapter after chapter. It switches, alternates from the characters. But I wrote it like this. I didn't write one first and then move to the other. And I don't remember thinking much about this. About rules or what I should or shouldn't do, but both were first person and both had a very different life, or at least the setup of the life. And I won't go into it, but only one example: the pace of the life in Tel Aviv and in Palestine is so different. One is the breathless modern city, and the other is just very slow rural. So the moment
and more poetic as well.
Yes. So the moment I went into that voice, I was there. I'm sorry I don't have do's or don'ts, but it's really, I think if a character is real enough and is formed enough, then the moment you're with it, you just go with the flow.
I think on that note, thank you both so very much, Assaf and Colum. Thank you for letting us inside of your heads and your careers. Colum and Assaf will be in the lobby signing books, and we welcome you back here at 5:30 for a conversation between Firouzeh Dumas and Mona Eltahawy. It's going to be another fabulous event. Thank you both so much.